Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'm going to be trying to grow some wasabi plants. So wasabi is a plant I've always wanted to try. It's quite a challenge, it's a very difficult plant to grow, and I also like the flavour of the spice. Or at least I've never eaten real wasabi, but I've had horseradish substitute, which is the vast majority of wasabi you find around the world, apart from if you're actually in an expensive restaurant. You won't actually get real wasabi paste, you'll get wasabi substitute, which is normally horseradish paste with a bit of green food colouring. But I like that taste anyway, so I should like wasabi hopefully. And it's a very interesting plant, very difficult to grow, which is why I like the challenge. But fortunately for me, a lot of the challenges in growing it should be overcome by my climate. So the thing that makes wasabi so hard to grow is it comes from a very specific ecological niche in Japan, and that's basically mountainous streams with cold water in shaded woodlands. And there's not many places in the world that have that exact climate. It's quite a stable climate, the water keeps it stable, also the altitude keeps it stable, as well as the tree canopy. So what they like is quite a stable, cool temperature. They don't like high temperatures, they don't like direct sunlight, but they also don't like hard freezes as well. That would probably be the biggest challenge for me, would be hard freezes. So temperature wise, it likes to be around 8 degrees to 18 degrees Celsius. So that's quite a cold temperature range for most plants. That's generally the growing conditions it likes. For winter dormancy, it can take cold. It can probably take 1 or 2 degrees below freezing, and it can take a light frost. But any hard frost like -5 or below will probably kill the whole plant. So that's the biggest problem for me. I have frost that can get down to -15, so that could be an issue. But my summer temperatures average around 18 degrees during the day as a daily maximum in July. So daytime temperatures are perfect for me. I can just put it in a shady location and that'll be absolutely fine. But the other problem is the type of soil that it likes to grow in. As it naturally grows on the edges of rivers or in the kind of stony, shingly areas of rivers. It likes to have a lot of water, but it doesn't like standing water. So I can't grow it like a bog plant. I can't put it in a pot with no drainage, just keep it nice and wet the whole time. That will cause the roots to rot off and die. What I really need to have is somewhere that I can have really free draining soil, but keep that soil wet at all times, which seems a bit of a contradiction, having very free draining soil but also having it constantly wet. But that's part of the reason why wasabi is so difficult to grow, is because you need to get that right balance. So in Japan, where it's grown, it'll be normally grown in the valley bottoms with these large artificial gravel beds which they then run the streams through. So it's got a constant flow of fresh water, kept nice and cold because the water comes from higher up in the mountains where it's much colder. So the water temperature is really quite low. It could be 10 degrees or so, even if the air temperature is more like 20 degrees. And so it's used to those cold conditions. If it doesn't have cold water flowing through its roots, it will suffer slightly. But with all plants, it will be slightly adaptable. Although it's got that niche that it likes the best, it can grow outside of it. And looking online, it should be able to grow no problem in soil, but it just won't grow as well. Ideally, you'd have almost like a hydroponic setup, where you'd have it in gravel with fresh water flowing through it all the time, and that's how they grow it for the restaurant trade. But you should be able to grow it in soil, and there's plenty of people on YouTube that have grown it successfully in soil, so that's the method I'm going to try. In the future, I would like to give it a more natural setting, so what I'd like to try is maybe have it in a sort of a hydroponic system with a gravel substrate with fresh water flowing over it. My problem is all my growing setups at the moment are set up for tropical plants. Because I'm here in North Scotland and it's quite cold outside, most of the plants I grow indoors are tropical plants, and I try and keep them as hot and as humid and sunny as possible, which is of course what this doesn't like. So I don't have any indoor space where it's nice and cool, so I can't really use my hydroponics for it. But in the future I might look into that. And interestingly enough, the climate in Scotland, especially the west coast where there's regular rainfall and they don't get such hard frosts in winter, there's probably a lot of mountain ravines there which this would actually grow really well in. So I might have a look, see if I can find a nice location to grow this. I won't be growing it in the wild because you can't just plant plants in the wild here in the UK, but I might see if I know any friends or family that might have a location with a small stream that I can plant this, and see if it will survive in that location as well. So these are the 3 plants I got anyway. They're looking a bit bedraggled because they've just come through the post and they weren't in a hard box, so they're actually squished through my letterbox. So hopefully they're going to survive, but it looks a little bit dodgy the way they've come through. So there's 3 small plugs here. I'm just going to cut them open and see how they look. It's a little bit tricky to get into, but we'll see how we get on. So here are the 3 plants. Unfortunately, the way the leaves have kind of grown, they're all kind of latched onto each other. So I'm just going to have to very carefully untangle the 3 plants. So that's 3 plants there. Unfortunately, there are quite a few damaged leaves. I'm not sure if that was me unpacking it or if that's how it came in the post. But you can see the small plants there. These have been grown in what looks like a peat-based substance. It could be something a bit more environmentally friendly like coir, but it does look a bit more like peat. But it looks like quite a wet substrate, and that's one of the substrates I'm going to try. But what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to grow these in 3 different soil mixes, see which one works best for me, and then I'm going to pot them on to a larger size and keep them in the best condition. So because I'm going to be testing out the substrates, I'm just going to be putting them in a 9cm pot, nice and small. That way I can quickly find out which ones do best. The reason I'm going to use these smaller pots is because it means they'll need to be repotted after only a few months. And then after a few months I'll be able to know which one they grow best in, and then I can put them all 3 of them into that soil mix. So as I say, there's 3 different mixes I'm going to go for, and I'll just show you them now. So I'm going to go for 2 mixes which are well drained, and so the first one here is a very high organic mix. So basically just multi-purpose compost. But this is a multi-purpose compost that isn't too high in feed. Thinking back to where this grows naturally in riverbeds, there shouldn't be a very high feed level in that soil. It should be mostly it should either be peat, to be honest, if it's waterlogged, or it should, but I don't think it will be, because these plants grow in fresh running water, which should be high oxygenated levels. So they're not bog plants, so they won't be in peat. But what they will be in, it's probably low organic matter because it's high oxygen levels, and it's probably just sand and silt and stones. So this one is a high organic matter anyway. I've read online that it likes high organic matter. Even though thinking back to where it grows naturally, it probably doesn't have a high organic matter level. I want to try it in that, see how it does. I've added about 50% perlite to this, so it's very free draining, which should be similar to what it grows in the wild with a free draining structure. Then thinking to where it grows in the wild, I'm wanting to give it something a bit similar to that. So what I've got here is actually just some of my topsoil. My topsoil is actually very poor. It's very sandy topsoil, and there is a bit of loam in there as well, but it's basically a sandy loam topsoil. There's very little organic matter and there's very little nutrients as well. But I've added lots of perlite to that, so it's already a free draining soil, but with extra perlite as well, 50% perlite, it should be very free draining. So it should be very similar to the conditions that it grows in the wild. The perlite is going to be a bit like the gravel, and the sand will be a bit more like the silty sandy beds of where it might be coming from. And then finally I want to see how it does in a really rich, high feed, high moisture content soil. So actually a bit like what these have come in. As I say, I didn't expect them to come in such a rich kind of mix, but they seem to have been grown in the nursery. So this is just a very rich multi-purpose compost with nothing added to it. This multi-purpose compost actually has very high feed levels, so this will recreate a condition that's not like what it is in the wild. But often a lot of plants, although they grow in a condition in the wild, that isn't the condition they grow best in. For example, cacti and succulents, in the wild they grow in very poor sandy soils with very little water. But the reason they grow in those soils is because nothing else can survive there, but they can. So when you grow them at home, if you actually give them a bit more water, a bit richer soil with more nutrients, they'll actually grow better than if you just give them desert conditions. So I'm just going to test if it's similar with this, with the wasabi. So this is a very rich soil, as I say. The only problem with this is it could have waterlogging issues. So we'll see how it does. But that's why I'm experimenting to see what does best. Ideally, as I say, I would like to create the conditions in the wild, have a really free draining mix of sand and gravel and silt, but that's not going to be possible, so, or at least at the moment it's not going to be possible. So this is what I'm going to try for now. 3 different soil mixes, so I'll just get started now and pot them all up. So that's the plants all potted up. Hopefully they'll recover soon. As I say, they do look a bit straggly and a bit unhealthy because they've been for the post and they're not looking at their best. But I'm hoping if I put them outside in some cool conditions, slightly shaded, they should perk up. I'm just going to keep them well watered. So I'll be interested to see how they do. This one in the middle is the low feed one, and no organic matter. If that one looks like it's struggling a bit, I might give it a little bit of feed. If it starts going a bit yellow, a lot of the lower leaves like this one here start going yellow, I will feed that. Otherwise I'm not going to feed the plants. I shouldn't expect they need too much feed. But being a very leafy plant, I'm expecting high nitrogen levels might be what they like, especially if they live in a water-based environment. where the nutrients that are in the water are going to be the most water soluble ones, and nitrogen tends to be one of the most water soluble nutrients. So it might be a high nitrogen feed plant, but we'll see how it does. I did have a look online to see different techniques for growing them. There's not too many scientific journals about it, and some of the big scale commercial farms that grow them don't disclose their growing techniques, especially the ones outside of Japan, because they don't want other people to grow them, basically, because they're such valuable plants. Once the stems become quite large on these, per kilogram they can cost several £100s, so they can be very expensive depending where you are in the world. So they're quite secretive on how to grow them. There's lots of people on YouTube, luckily, that do give advice, and there are other people giving advice online, but there's not as much scientific research as you would expect for a food crop, partly because it's such a niche plant, and also because the high price that it fetches. They seem to be a bit secretive about how they cultivate them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grow these under a tray. What I'm going to do is every day I'm going to give these a water with cold water. Water from the top, let the water flow through. They're going to sit in a very shallow layer of water at the bottom. I don't want them sitting saturated, but I want the compost to be constantly wet, so I'll probably let the water stay about this high on the pot. That way I can keep them nice and damp. I don't have to worry about them drying out, and I'll just replace that water at the bottom every time I water, and water from the top. I'll try and do it on a daily basis if I can, but it's going to be a lot of work, so I might reduce it down to a 2 or 3 day rotation for watering. I'm not too sure yet. So as I say, these like shade preferably. I'm in North Scotland where light levels aren't actually that strong, so I'm going to try and give this some morning and afternoon sun if I can, but otherwise I'm going to be avoiding midday sun completely. But it's going to be quite a bright location. It's not going to have anything over the top shading it. It's basically just going to be behind a north facing wall, so it's going to be quite shaded. And as for humidity, humidity might be a slight issue here. It can get quite dry in the spring months in East Scotland, and we do get the occasional heat wave where it gets up to 25 degrees Celsius, something like that, and it can be quite low humidity, around 50%. So I'm going to try and keep it humid if I can. I might put some kind of cover over it that can keep the air a bit more stagnant and get the humidity levels to build up. But being in that tray full of water, that should certainly help. North facing as well, and it's between my conservatory and my north facing wall of the house, so it's actually going to be quite a sheltered location, so it should hopefully do quite well there. So I'll see you guys in a few weeks and we'll see how they do. It's just coming into summer now, so the temperature is still a bit cold. Even for wasabi it's a bit cold. I might have to put some fleece over them if we get some hard frosts, but generally I'm just going to leave them unprotected and we'll see how they do. So it's now 2.5 months later. These plants have been through quite a lot in the last couple of months. As I said in the last video, we were just starting to come into summer, but it was really late spring, and late spring in Scotland can be quite unpredictable. Unfortunately, we had a very cold April, and May was particularly wet and cold as well, so the plants really didn't grow at all over those months. If anything, they kind of went downhill a little bit, lost a lot of their lower leaves. We did also have a lot of hailstorms. These were covered in ice several times, and we had a few frosts as well. But they all seem to come through them without too much damage. As I say, they have lost their lower leaves, but they put on a few newer leaves. I think part of the reason is the old leaves were quite leggy. I think they were grown in lower light conditions, probably in a polytunnel or something. These have been outside in a much windier location, higher light levels, and so the leaves are much tougher now. You can see they've got a bit more of a nice waxy, glossy colour to them. The stems are much shorter, and they're much tougher and more robust to the environment. So it's really toughened the plants up, but the plants themselves, if anything, have probably shrunk very slightly in size. You can see there's not quite as many leaves, but leaves we do have are much healthier than they were. Now when it comes to growth, this is the one with low organic, low nutrients. This is high organic, high nutrients, well drained, and then this is just pure multi-purpose compost, a high organic matter, high nutrients, and that's actually done the best, and the one that's done the worst is the one in the middle. So I think part of the problem is when I'm constantly watering it from the top, it's leaching out all the nutrients with every watering. Even though some of the water gets collected in the bottom, I tend to empty that out and throw it out, because I don't want these sitting in deep in water. I just want the bottom just slightly covered like they are now. And so what's been happening is I'm washing out all the nutrients from the water, and in the first few weeks this one grew particularly well. But even recently this one has started to lose some of its lower leaves and they've gone yellow. I think that's a lack of nitrogen. So I'm actually going to change my watering regime now, and I might actually repot these later on in the season, these two, into just pure multi-purpose compost, because that actually seems to be the type of compost that it seems to grow best in. As I say, it might work better for different peoples in different substrates, but in my particular situation this seems to be the best so far. Ideally, gravel bed with fresh water flowing through constantly with decent feed levels in that water would be the ideal situation, but I just like to try a couple of different growing methods for mine and see how they do. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to change the watering regime. I'm going to water them less. I'm going to probably have about the same amount of water sitting in the bottom, maybe slightly less, let it dry out every now and again, and water them a lot less frequently, so I'm not constantly washing the water through. And I'm also going to start feeding them as well, see if they respond well to the feed, because at the moment I think most of the nutrients has been washed out, and that's why we got these yellow leaves starting to appear. It seems to be a real lack of nitrogen at the moment, and it tends to be nitrogen which gets leached out first. The other minerals and nutrients in the soil, they're not quite as water soluble, so it tends to be nitrogen that gets lost first out of all the nutrients. So I'm probably just going to give it a pure nitrogen feed to begin with, and then I'll start giving it a balanced feed. I'll see how it does with that. Hopefully I don't burn the roots, but I don't think the roots are too sensitive, because this one here was in quite a rich compost, and it actually seemed to benefit quite well from that. So that's all from this video. I'll see you guys hopefully in a few months time at the end of the summer, see how they've grown. Hopefully they'll have got a bit bigger. There's not really much stem formation yet. You can see it's still just a rosette of leaves. With most wasabi, you're going to be expecting to wait a year or two anyway for some stem, maybe even longer if you don't have the optimum growing conditions. So I'm not expecting to get a decent harvest out of this for probably 2 or 3 years. But what I am hoping for is maybe to get some offshoots that I can divide and produce more plants. And then in a few years time, if I have like 5 or 10 plants, then hopefully every 6 months or so I can have a nice big stem that I can harvest if I have a good enough stock of plants. So that's all for this video, and as I say, I'll see you guys at the end of the summer hopefully, and we'll see how much these have grown.